Thank you very much, Rosalind. That was kind of you to say. Can't tell you how privileged and humble I am to be here to speak today about this subject matter. It's I know it's not a whole lot of fun to listen to all this today. It's can be quite depressing, for sure. But I appreciate you being here and all the speakers today. It's just wonderful. I was just telling Mr. Smeaton that I really like attending these because we've been in this fight now for over 10 years, and I go to these conferences and I always learn something, and there's always something that I can take back with me. Very inspirational, very informative, very inspiring, very touching, as we saw earlier today. And of course, Colin. I knew Allison quite well before she died, and I thought of the tragedy would have been if she would have taken her life, that she wasn't able to touch the people that she touched, me included, when in this fight that she was in, that we're all in. So I'm incredibly grateful to her for how she inspired me to continue to do what I do and to validate what we do to protect people with disabilities. So again, I just want to thank for inviting me today. For I didn't even know. What did they nickname SPUC? Is it? SPUC. I heard people saying SPUC or something like that. I'm like, what? Or SPUC? Whatever it was. Whatever it was. It just it didn't occur to me who that was. But it's always. I love coming. This is my third time to England. I love your accents. I really do. I'm not kidding you. There was a when I was in college, there was a girl, and she had this English accent. We didn't really even get along, but I just loved listening to her speak. And my accent, I'm from Philadelphia, so you got the Rocky accent going today. You all know who Rocky is, right? Oh. Did anybody go to Philly for the World Family? Just one? Oh, wow, just one of you. Okay. But so hopefully you'll understand some of my Philly accent. We speak a little differently, like use guys and what was it? Some of the other things. But you'll hear them as the more I speak here today. So, but again, thank you for being here. I'm here obviously to talk about my sister Terri. How many remember or know anything about my sister's case? It's been 10 years now since she's died. Just a few of you. Okay. Well, yeah, there's a few of you. Well, the reason we're still talking about Terri, and I'll talk about her case as I go forward here in my presentation. But the reason we're still talking about my sister is because the issue did not die with Terri. In fact, what happened to Terri was happening long before her case made as much publicity that it did. It really became a national and international case. But it was happening before her case, and it's happening today. In fact, it's getting worse. The past 10 years, we started a nonprofit, and we now handle cases similar to what my sister went through and our family went through, trying to protect her. And there is no doubt that things are getting worse. And that's why it's so important to see people your age at these conferences, because hopefully what we've messed up and what's going on today can be fixed. And it's only going to be fixed, and I think Dr. Howard alluded to this, it's going to be up to you guys to hopefully fix and do a better job of protecting people that are in jeopardy of being killed every day, better than what we have done so far. But I got to tell you, it's going to be a tough task, because what is happening and what continues to happen is quite frightening. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. I talk about my sister, and then kind of segue into what happened to Terri and is continuing to happen. How did that happen? What is influencing our culture today? And a lot of things have already been said by the previous presentations, so make what I say a little easier, perhaps. But I think there's a couple things I want to focus on that I think have been driving this issue. And there's many dynamics that go into what is happening today. But I'm going to kind of single out just a few and give some examples of why I think our culture and our nation, and really on a global scale, has changed, where what happened to Terri is so widely accepted today. And that's what's really frightening. I think there is a profound prejudice that exists against people with disabilities. And that's what I'm here to talk about today. The assisted suicide issue has been talked about a lot today, even though it's intertwined with what I'm going to speak about. It's not in particular, it's not what I'm going to speak about in particular. What I'm going to talk about is food and water, and how, because of the reclassification of food and water through feeding tubes has been changed, how people that are receiving just basic care, food and hydration through a feeding tube, are being killed every day. And that's basically what happened to my sister. So I'm not here to speak about those who are actively dying, might have some underlying terminal illness, who might be on machines. They are case-by-case situations, and they're very different from what I'm talking about today. What I'm talking about today are people that are not dying and are only being sustained because of food and hydration through a feeding tube. Many of them are on feeding tubes either for a short period of time or something longer, as my sister, something more permanent, because they have, whatever the reason might be, might have difficulty swallowing. But because of this problem that they have swallowing and they need a food and hydration through a feeding tube, it has now exposed them to this very aggressive culture of death, euthanasia movement, whichever way you want to describe it, that's occurring, again, on a global basis. Before I get into Terri, I think it's good to start off because just a couple quotes here that kind of put things in perspective, perhaps. Have you all heard of Wesley J. Smith? He's a very well-known, at least in the States. He does extensive speaking, not only in the United States but internationally, and he is one of the leading experts, I like to say, on this issue. And he has two quotes that I really like and I think really characterize what we're talking about here today. He says, one, once killing is accepted as an answer to human difficulty and suffering, the power of sheer logic dictates that there is no bottom. And what is he saying? He's saying once we accept suffering as an answer, as an answer, or as an acceptance to killing someone, then there's basically no boundaries. And I think that's what's happening today. And he also says this. He says, the morality of the 21st century will depend on how we respond to this simple but profound question. Does every human life have equal moral value simply and merely because it's human? Do we all have human value? Are we all of equal worth, as God has already told us? Do we all have equal worth simply and merely because we're human? And he says if we answer yes to that, then we have a chance at achieving universal human rights. If we say no, then Wesley says it means that we are merely just another animal in the forest. And unfortunately, I think the answer to that question is no. I mean, more and more we're seeing, and I'm going to illustrate that here for you today, that we do not think certain people of or certain classes are human merely, or have equal moral worth or value simply merely because they're human. In fact, we're redefining human beings every single day, which I'll talk about. So what happened to Terri? My sister was, we were 13 months apart in age. She was 26 years old, I believe, perfectly healthy. We were living in Florida. We were from Philadelphia, as I said, our family. My dad basically retired, moved to Florida, and we kind of followed him. I have a younger sister, Suzanne, and my mom and dad, and then there was Terri and myself. And we were very close. In fact, we lived in the same apartment complex at the time of Terry's collapse. And I got a call in the middle of the night. It was Saturday going into Sunday, and my dad had called and said, hey, I just received a call from Michael Schiavo, Terry's husband at the time, and said something happened to Terri. Can you get over there and see what's going on? So, because my dad knew I was within seconds or minutes, really, of being able to get there. So I remember I threw on my clothes. I got there within minutes, and I walked into Terry's apartment, and she was on the ground. I walked over to her, and she was still breathing, although it was labored. She was on the ground, and her face down. And I remember I went down to shake her and said, "Come on, Terri, get up." And I wasn't terribly concerned because I had saw Terri just a few hours earlier, and she was perfectly fine, and she was perfectly healthy. There was nothing that we knew that was wrong with her. So I thought perhaps she just collapsed or just passed out, whatever it may be. And I remember I shook her, and she was unresponsive. It was just then that the paramedics got there, the emergency response team, and I knew as soon as they started tending to her, there was something seriously wrong. They couldn't find a pulse. They had to hit her with the defibrillators several times to try and get her heart started. They worked on her for must have been a half hour or maybe longer, and before they were able to stabilize her enough to transfer her to a hospital. And it was really the first couple days we didn't know if Terri was going to live or die. To this day, we do not know what caused her to collapse, but because of her collapse, she went several minutes without oxygen to the brain and experienced a profound brain injury. At first, she was on machines that were helping keeping her alive. I mean, everything you can imagine seemed to be hooked up to my sister because of the trauma she experienced and the lack of oxygen from her collapse. After just a few weeks, everything was removed from my sister except the feeding tube. She had difficulty swallowing, and she still needed from her brain injury, so she still needed a feeding tube in her stomach that would feed her once a day in order for her to be sustained. But that was it. There was nothing else keeping my sister alive. In the first 2 years, Michael Schiavo, who is also Terri's guardian, and my family were all working together to give her the best rehabilitation possible, to try. Some of the doctors felt that she had some good signs to be rehabilitated. To what degree, we didn't know. But she was starting to make improvements those first 2 years. While getting rehabilitation and therapy, she was starting to form words, starting to speak. Unfortunately, this was in 1990, 1992. Without going into much of the details of what was going on here, because I mean, I wish I could talk to you more about some of the fine details. But Michael stopped. There was a medical malpractice lawsuit that Michael initiated against Terri's treating doctors before her collapse, blaming them for the collapse. There was a trial. The jury came back and awarded my sister a medical trust that was over $1.5 million, and that was supposed to be for Terri's lifelong care and rehabilitation. It was shortly after that award that everything stopped. Rehabilitation stopped. The care that Terri was receiving basically stopped. Michael was the person making these decisions. My family, my mom and dad, had no power as far as making any medical decisions for my sister. Everything had to go through Michael, who was the guardian. So as you can imagine, someone, or if you know anybody that has a type of brain injury, if you stop the one thing they need more than anything, they're going to deteriorate. And we didn't know why Michael did this right then. We learned later. But we were trying to get Terri to continue rehabilitation. He said no. In fact, on 2 occasions over the next 2 years, subsequent to him stopping all rehabilitation, he tried to kill her by withdrawing antibiotics when she acquired a simple urinary tract infection. Again, we didn't know why. The relationship between Michael and our family was severed because we found out about 2 years after Terri's collapse that Michael indeed was trying to withhold antibiotics. The nursing home where Terri was being cared for told us he was trying to do this. So we were basically powerless in trying to do anything for my sister other than just go in and visit her and try to stimulate her the best way we could. We learned later that Michael had met another woman, and his loyalties obviously had shifted to this other woman. He was living with her. We found out later that he actually proposed to her to marry her once Terri would die, which doctors said Terri could have lived a normal lifespan. There was nothing that was going to cause her death. The brain injury was not going to cause her death. As long as she was being fed through the feeding tube, she could live a normal lifespan. Well, several years, it was 1997. The situation didn't really change much other than Terri really starting to deteriorate physically because of the lack of rehabilitation and therapy. It was 1997. We received a letter. Michael had found himself an attorney, a euthanasia attorney, letting my parents know, our family know, that he was going to petition the court in Florida to take away Terri's food and hydration. Our family was blindsided. We had no idea he was going to do this. So our reaction was, there's no way we're going to allow this to happen. We got ourselves an attorney. First my dad had written Michael a letter. Nothing was working. He wasn't getting back to us. So we decided we had to find an attorney to fight Michael to stop this from happening. It finally went to trial in 2000. It was about 3 years after the initial letter that we received. There was a week-long trial in front of Judge George Greer in Florida. After this trial, Judge Greer decided in favor of Michael. Michael went to court, and what was his argument now? What was he going to say to convince the judge to remove Terri's food and hydration? Well, he said before Terri's collapse that if she ever became dependent on others, she wouldn't want to live that way. This was news to us. We never heard Terri say this. It was all hearsay evidence. Nonetheless, Michael went into the court with this hearsay evidence. The judge believed him, didn't believe anyone in our family. Some of Terri's closest friends who all testified that Terri never said these types of things. Nevertheless, the judge agreed with Michael. That was in February 11th, 2001. 2000. That was just about a month after the original trial. Our family, it turned into a protracted legal battle. We appealed the court's decision, and along the way, it started snowballing as far as publicity. In 2002, Governor Jeb Bush, who you might have heard of, got involved. He was the governor of Florida, to try and stop this from happening. When he got involved, it started snowballing even more as far as publicity. The Florida legislature got involved, along with the governor. Actually, the Florida legislature got involved first, then the governor. It escalated to the point where the Congress of the United States got involved. President Bush got involved. This was all in 2005. By that time, there was it became not just a national case, it became an international case. We were getting support from pro-life groups, disability groups. The Vatican was involved. Pope John Paul was knew of the case. In fact, he issued an allocution on March 2004 that was a result of what was going on with my sister. So we had all these people, millions of people across the country, in different parts of the world, that were supporting my sister's efforts, or our family's efforts to protect Terri. We had disability groups, pro-life groups, the president, the governor, the Vatican. Even, I think, the two celebrities in Hollywood came out who were pro-life to speak out for my sister. That was a joke. Get only two, because there's nobody in Hollywood that's pro-life. So, but nonetheless, why do I say this? The reason I say this is because we had all these people and groups that were supporting our efforts to stop Terri, to stop this from happening to my sister. And none of them were successful. We were unsuccessful in stopping this movement, these people behind what they were trying to do, which was to kill an innocent disabled woman by a way that not too long ago we would have said was barbaric and inhumane, by dehydration and starvation. But yet, despite all this help we're receiving, we were unable to stop this from happening. And on March 18th, 2005, Terri's feeding tube was removed. And for the next 2 weeks, we had to walk into a hospice facility and watch Terri slowly die, a slow, agonizing death, which I'm going to talk about later on in my presentation. This is something no family should ever have to witness, yet every single day families are having to suffer the same way our family did, because what happened to Terri is perfectly legal, if you can imagine this. Perfectly legal. And that's why I give you so much credit. When I was your age, this pro-life was not even on, the abortion issue, euthanasia was not even on my radar. It took my sister's case to wake me up to the reality of what was happening to our most medically vulnerable, our most vulnerable, citizens in our country, and really on a global basis, are being exposed to this movement, and more and more people are accepting it as it being okay. So, as a result of what happened to my sister, our family saw the importance. See, when we were defending Terri, we were, in the very beginning, we were calling organizations, pro-life organizations, anybody we could find that we were hoping would help our efforts to not only expose what was happening, but could somehow come to our side and help us against this, because we were completely naive. We had no idea at the time what we're up against. And I think it's it's important to say, again, about my sister and her condition. She was not dying. She was not in harm's way. There was nothing that was going to end her life, so to speak. In fact, she was not brain dead. She was not in a coma. She was not in a persistent vegetative state, which I know was mentioned earlier. In fact, if Terri were alive today, we could bring her to this conference. All she needed was a wheelchair. We could take her anywhere. I mean, it wouldn't have been the easiest thing to do, but nonetheless, we could have done it. We could have brought her here today to show you just how alive and fully human she was. Just because she had a disability didn't make her any less human than any one of us in this room. It's amazing to me, the arrogance of these people, that because someone's physical appearance changes, somehow they lose their dignity, they lose their value. And we want to define them as being as non-persons, which I'm going to talk about in a second. But our family started the Life and Hope Network. We do three things, basically. We raise awareness, we educate the public, and most importantly, we help families that call us for help. We try to be the organization that we couldn't find when our family began this fight to try and protect my sister. So that's what we started doing, and we've been extremely busy. And that's why I said earlier that this issue undoubtedly is getting worse. And I've been out speaking for over 10 years on this issue. I never thought I'd be a speaker. Believe me, it's funny, did you ever hear that joke? I'm not a public speaker, and I'm going to spend the next 40 minutes proving it to you. So, and I'm really not. I was a brother. I'm not a doctor. I'm not an attorney. I'm just a brother that was exposed to something that most people would define as evil. But yet it's becoming, as I say, I'll probably say it more than once, I already have said it, but yet it's this growing acceptance of something that has become completely routine and ordinary in our culture today. And why? And again, that's what I want to talk about today. Why are we even here? I mean, why did my sister's case make the publicity that it did? People will often come up to me and say, you know, Bobby, what you and your family did was so heroic and extraordinary. And it really makes me uncomfortable when people say that, because what is so extraordinary about wanting to care for your loved one, care for your daughter, care for your sister? I'm sure I'm sure every one of you in this room, if faced with the same circumstances our family is faced with, would have done the same thing. I mean, would anybody ever think of deliberately starving and dehydrating to death your loved one? It didn't make sense to me or my family. That we didn't think there'd be a court in the land. I'm telling you, we were so naive that would ever permit this to happen. So we're not doing anything extraordinary. We're not doing anything heroic. We're just doing what we thought a family member should do, and that is protect your loved one from what we thought was something that would never be allowed. But yet it was, and we felt compelled to continue fighting for families that are faced with similar circumstances. Our slogan or our logo is "Where there's life, there's help." But someone said, I thought we should change it to "We're there when others want to kill you." And unfortunately, that's what's the sad part about it. So what's happened? I mean, what is allowing this to be legal now in all 50 states? In the United States, all 50 states, it's legal to remove food and hydration from someone. Again, we're not talking about any other types of machines keeping this person alive. It is now legal to take away food and hydration, basic care, from someone with a disability and a person with Alzheimer's. There are so many medically vulnerable now that fit under this umbrella, in large part because of what I'm going to talk about in a second. But first, I think there's been a rule. You all know what the Roe versus Wade ruling is when it comes to, right? It basically opened up abortion on demand for the abortion issue, the Roe versus Wade legalization or decriminalization of abortion. Well, I think there was the same type of ruling on this issue. Again, that many, if not most, of the euthanasia organizations in the United States are fighting the assisted suicide issue. And they should be, because there's a strong push to legalize assisted suicide. But nobody is really fighting against the food and water issue. And this law where it used to be illegal to remove food and hydration from an individual has been changed. Food and hydration through feeding tubes used to be considered extraordinary care. Used to be considered ordinary care and basic, as I mentioned. It has now been reclassified as extraordinary care, as medical treatment, as artificial life support. This little chain, and again, we go back to language, right? Verbal engineering, language changes, and look at the ramification. Look what has happened for the language change on how we define feeding tubes. Incidentally, how many Catholics do we have here today? Oh, good. Is anybody not Catholic here? Well, Pope John Paul came out with a clarification on church teaching when it comes to this issue. Again, person not dying, only receiving food and hydration through feeding tubes. The Catholic Church does not recognize feeding tubes as anything other than ordinary and basic. And as such, we are morally obligated to continue it to people if they are being cared for this way. But what happened was, the culture of death, did you ever hear the expression, if it can be thought of, it can be done? Well, the culture of death is always looking for ways to make it easier and acceptable to kill people. And they saw the feeding tube as a major hurdle, I think someone might have mentioned it here earlier, to what they were trying to accomplish, and that was to make it easier to kill. By the way, what do you think is driving all this? All of this. What do you think is driving it? Yes, money. It's money. It's the abortion issue, this issue. The money is driving it all, and they wanted to find a way, because these people were living too long, and I'm going to read something to you in a second, which is costly. So we got to find a way to be able to kill them in a relatively short period of time, so we have to pay for them. So again, I'm going to mention Wesley Smith quite a bit here. He wrote a book, if you're more interested in this issue, it's called Culture of Death. In fact, he just reissued a new edition. I think it just came out recently. And in Wesley's book, he addressed the feeding tube issue. And let me just read. Not to confuse you, but I wrote an op-ed, and I included Wesley's part here on feeding tubes. Let me read this to you. In his book, Culture of Death, The Assault on Medical Ethics in America, author and bioethicist Wesley J. Smith writes that defining artificial nutrition as treatment instead of human care was a crucial step in the development of the culture of death. I basically just said that. According to Smith, as far back as the early 80s, bioethicists, and this bioethicist movement, you want to talk about the complete shift in the mentality of so many in our medical institution today. But according to Smith, as far back as the early 80s, bioethicists began to debate out loud whether or not the profoundly disabled and frail elderly were living too long. In particular was bioethicist Daniel Callahan, who saw the feeding tube as a serious hurdle, boldly stating that changing its classification from basic care to medical treatment would be the only effective way to make certain that a large number of biologically tenacious patients actually die. So again, they're living too long, we got to find a way to kill them. Eventually, more bioethicists agreed with Callahan's view, as well as healthcare professionals, politicians, judges, and others, ultimately accomplishing their goal of redefining the administration of food and hydration via feeding tube. Today, either the general public is unaware of this change or they just don't care, but if you think dehydrating to death or medically vulnerable isn't happening, then you're not paying attention. As I said, it's legal in all 50 states of the United States, and I believe different parts of Europe also find it legal to take away food and hydration to people with disabilities, the elderly, and so many other medically vulnerable. But the culture of death is not stopping there. Their next battle, which it started in the United States, it started in Canada a few years ago, and there was just a case there was 2 cases in Canada where a family, they lost, but they sued the nursing home to starve their mother to death. You know on what grounds they sued the nursing home? Their mother didn't have a feeding tube. The mother was being fed, had to be fed. She was unable to feed herself. So they wanted to define physicians orders for the food that the woman was being prescribed. She had a certain diet. They wanted to define that as medical treatment. And as such, if it was medical treatment, just like in feeding tubes, they can deny it to people. So the family was suing the nursing home to starve their mother to death by not removing a feeding tube, by the nursing staff to stop feeding her. So it's not going to, now the court denied this. They ruled against them, but don't think that's going to stop the people behind this, because they want to legalize food on a tray as medical treatment if a person cannot feed themselves. And it won't be long before some court, some judge will legalize this, and then again, that'll now be part of a way that we can kill these medically vulnerable. So again, I speak of these influences today that have really changed the way we view these medically vulnerable and why it's become so relatively easy to kill them. And I think one of the biggest influences, and there's more, and I'm not trying to indict all bioethicists, all doctors, nurses, the healthcare professionals. We have some, in fact, there's a wonderful doctor here right today that spoke. And there are some wonderful nurses and doctors, and there's some wonderful bioethicists out there, Wesley Smith being one of them. But I think there's a growing trend, and at least in our country, and I think globally, of this quality of life acceptance among the healthcare professionals and in others, judges, many others that are shaping public policy today, where they are now deciding, where they believe, based on someone's quality of life, we can decide whether they live or die. And no one more at fault or guilty as this is the modern medical ethics, or these bioethicists that have a direct influence on public policy that are changing our laws. Who here has heard of personhood theory? A few of you? Okay, good. Who of you have heard Peter Singer? Okay, well, then you understand. There is a strong push, and it's already taking hold, which I'm going to show to you in a chilling article in just a second. It's called personhood theory. Well, we can define, and I think Colin was talking earlier about labeling or giving people, we call them different types of disabilities, right? How we categorize people with different types of disabilities. Well, personhood theory basically throws them all underneath one umbrella, and if they're under this umbrella, then we should decide whether or not they live or die. If you're a human non-person, then we should be able to kill you. And wait to hear who are human non-persons. But this is all, we can thank this bioethicist movement. And these bioethicists, where do you think they have the strongest influence? Where do you think they are, these bioethicists? Where do you think they try and convince people of these things? I'm sorry? I'm sure that the United Nations, but they're basically everywhere. They're ubiquitous. But primarily they're in our universities. They're teaching our future doctors and nurses, our future leaders, this notion of personhood theory, where some human beings should be defined as human non-persons. Let me just read this to you. Again, going back to Wesley. This is an article he wrote in 2002. He said, "The new Grim Reapers, practitioners of bioethics say who should live and who should die." 2002, 13 years ago, he was talking about this. This is what he writes. "Bioethicists often assert that what counts morally is not being human, but being a person." I can't make this stuff up. What do you hear this? "A status earned by possessing identifiable mental capabilities such as being self-aware or having the ability to engage in rational behavior." So, to be human, you have to be self-aware and have the ability to engage in rational behavior, is what he's saying. While the exact criteria for determining who is and who is not a person are still being debated, most bioethicists agree that there are human beings who are not persons. So Wesley asks, who are they? Generally, such unfortunates include all embryos and fetuses, because they are not capable of rational thought, but other forms of human life, such as infants, are also denigrated as non-persons for the same reasons. That means they've been born. Other designated human non-persons include advanced Alzheimer's patients, people with serious cognitive disabilities, such as the comatose and those in near coma. At the same time, some bioethicists, and this is where it gets really weird, Wesley says, believe that intelligent animals, particularly chimps, apes, dogs, dolphins, elephants, and pigs, are persons. According to this view, these animal persons have greater moral value than do human non-persons. This means some animals should be treated with greater respect than some people. Okay, I mean, I hope that seems crazy to everybody in here, because it certainly seems that way to me. And I think I alluded to this arrogance of this movement, this modern medical ethics. But if you don't think it's starting to have its effect after years and years of teaching this in our universities, let me read this from a 2014 article titled, "More College Students Approve of After-Birth Abortion Up to Age 5." And this is 2004. This is just what? It was October 2014, just a year and a half ago, not even a year and a half ago. Some pro-choice students think it is morally acceptable to kill a child after birth up to the age of 5, according to a Christian group that does pro-life counseling on college campuses, said Christina Garza, Director of Campus Outreach for the California-based survivors of the abortion Holocaust. Since their requirements for personhood are completely arbitrary, they throw around numbers, 4 years old, 5 years old. I had one friend say a college professor claimed 6 years old was a good cutoff, she added. They say that this child can't fend for himself, or the child's not self-aware, therefore it's not fully human. Or they'll say it's human, but the child is not a person because it is not self-aware or can't survive on its own. CNS News asked Garza whether she believes students think that after-birth abortion is morally acceptable because they've been taught so by their, because they have been taught so by the professors, or because it's a logical extension of the prevailing abortion mentality. So she asked them, are the professors teaching you this? Is that why you believe it? Or is it spilled over from the abortion mentality? And she answers, well, I think both, she replied, which makes sense. I think we're increasingly seeing that people are reading modern ethicists' influences like Peter Singer as part of required reading. So they're kind of accepting these very, very liberal ideologies because they're being asked to read them in their courses. So obviously, they're being taught this garbage, that some persons are human non-persons, therefore it's okay for us to end their life. We should be the ones deciding. So again, there's more than just this happening that's affecting our culture. But this is stuff that's every day desensitizing us to the value of human life, that's indoctrinating us into this belief. Now, I mentioned the bioethicist, right, and feeding tubes. And also, the one I want to mention today, obviously, and you probably already know, is the media. And the media, particularly in my sister's case, and that's when our family was exposed to the influence and the power of the media. And they're behind this just as bad. I mean, we see it in the abortion industry, but believe me, their agenda is just as strong and focused as it is in this issue. Now they are constantly reporting, and even to this day, that my sister is brain dead. If you do a Google search on Terri Schiavo, you'll see story after story of her being brain dead, of her being in a coma, of her being in a persistent vegetative state, of her being unresponsive, unable to rehabilitate, of her having not aware of her surroundings, not able to follow commands, being a non-person. All this, being called a vegetable as a spin-off from persistent vegetative state. All this while ignoring videos of my sister where she was, why don't you see for yourself? I'm going to show you a video. This was from 2002. This is of my sister. The voice you'll hear is a neurologist asking my sister to do something. Now, what was remarkable about this video that I'm going to show you, it was 10 years approximately after Terri was basically warehoused and abandoned by her estranged husband, Michael Schiavo, receiving no formal type or meaningful type of rehabilitation and therapy, yet being taken away from having any type of real care. My sister was still able to react the way she was. Now, the judge saw this, and the media saw this, and people on the other side saw this, but yet, as much as they were as much as they are now as they were back then, they will not admit that this video meant anything other than what the narrative is continually said about my sister. But the media, I think, just as much as the other influences that are changing our attitudes towards this issue, just continues to hammer away at my sister's case, because they know if they can justify Terri's death and rationalize Terri's death in the media, they can convince others that what they did to Terri is okay to do to others like her. I mean, I want to show you, I don't know if you ever heard of Nat Hentoff. He's one of the most, he's a highly regarded journalist in America. And in 2002, he already saw what was happening in my sister's case. And as you see here, he's been involved in other types of right-to-die cases, so to speak, even though I like to call them right-to-life cases, Karen Ann Quinlan, Nancy Cruzan. And he saw back in 2002 the attitude and the position of the media, where he even said that he believed it was journalistic malpractice the way they were reporting my sister's case. It was a pretty strong indictment against the media from somebody who had been around and very highly regarded by his own colleagues, would say something like this. This was and again, I go back to the profound prejudices that exist against people with disabilities. This is a DJ, what we call him, a shock jock in Florida, Tampa, Florida. And he's also on Sirius Radio. I still believe he's on Sirius Radio. Back at the height of Terri's, and even, this was 5 years after Terri's case, but even prior to that, when he would talk about my sister's case, this is how he would describe her, with this vulgar and vile description. And as far as I know, if he ever brings up Terri, I'm sure he's saying the same thing. But I mean, imagine this being your sister or your brother who has a disability and has done nothing wrong to deserve this. And there's just a family that wants to love her and care for her just the way she is. And yet people are attacking her like this. And other people listen to this. You know, well, let me just go on because there's something else I want to show you. But this is, I think, again, it's having a very powerful effect on shaping the way we think about these issues. Have you all heard of The Family Guy? Very popular TV show in United States. I don't know if they show it over here in syndication, or even, I don't even know if it's, I believe it's still on the air. Well, back in 2010, 5 years after Terri's death, they did a skit on my sister. And let me show you. It's only about 1.5 minutes long. This was the introduction to this particular episode.
Terri Schiavo. Or too late. Shh, it's Stephanie.
I mean, it really speaks for itself, but you can see the influence this is having. I mean, the demographics for this show is high schoolers and college kids. And, you know, I mean, they didn't even get my sister's situation right. She wasn't on any machines at all. But this is offensive not only to Terri's memory, but all the people like my sister and their families that are caring for them and love them. just the way they are. So, but you know, who do we blame for shows like this? Who do we blame for the shock jock and what he says? It comes back to us. Because if we weren't listening to this, or if we weren't watching these shows, then they wouldn't be able to produce this type of stuff. So it really falls on us to stop allowing these things to occur, for lack of a better way of saying it. But nonetheless, it's because of this, again, this constant hammering away at the devalue or at the value of life. Obviously, the abortion issue, this is a result. It's hard not to. How can you not understand how we're not going to have euthanasia? We're going to have euthanasia when abortion was legalized, right? It's a natural progression. Once you devalue one life, you're going to devalue all lives. So we shouldn't be surprised with abortion that we're now killing the disabled, the elderly, and so many other medically vulnerable individuals. I heard this expression one time when someone said, once parents allowed the killing of children, how long would it be before children would allow the killing of parents? And I think that's what's occurring right now. As I said, March 18th, 2005 is when we lost our battle to stop this from happening, despite all the people that were supporting our efforts. And it was going the wrong way there. It was when Terri began her 2 weeks of dehydration and starvation. Please understand something. You're going to hear, you'll read it, you'll hear it from the other side, that this is a peaceful and painless way to die. That they don't feel anything. They just kind of drift off in some type of euphorium. Am I pronouncing that right? Where it's a way that should cause us no. We shouldn't be upset by a person dying this way, because they will drift off and actually it'll be a painless way to die. It is an absolute lie. It's something they have to tell you. This was one of the most barbaric, inhumane experiences that anybody should ever have to witness. We can't do this to a person on death row. It's considered cruel and unusual punishment. If we do this to an animal in the United States, it's a felony crime. But yet, every single day, as I keep saying, we do this to our most medically vulnerable. Not to go into a lot of the details of the graphic nature, and I'm going to show you a picture here in a moment. But I don't know what was more. I guess it took almost 2 weeks for Terri to die, and I think it was about 4 or 5 days before she actually passed away, that we would not allow my mom to go see her anymore because of her physical nature and how much she was deteriorating. I don't know what was worse, was walking into a room and seeing Terri die this way, or walk into a room and see my mom and dad have to watch their child die this way, their daughter, without being able to do a thing to stop it from happening. My dad had told me, my dad suffered a stroke shortly after Terri died, and he died a couple years after that. And he had told me privately one time that he was never able to forgive himself as a father for not being able to stop this from happening. And it's something he had to live with until he died, again, just a few short years after Terri had passed away. But I want to just for a moment, for 10 years, I never really, I talked about it, but I never thought of really exposing what happened to my sister during those 2 weeks. And we weren't allowed cameras or videos. There was armed police that we had to go through 3 checkpoints before we could visit my sister when she was being killed this way. In fact, there was always 2 or 3 armed policemen in the room with us while we were visiting Terri to make sure that we weren't doing anything like give her hydration. They would arrest us immediately. In fact, if we even put lip gloss on Terry's lips because of the cracking and bleeding, we would be arrested immediately. But George Filos, Michael Schiavo's attorney, came out and to the world did a press conference and said this. He said, frankly, I never saw her, meaning Terri, look so beautiful. And I put those pictures up there and the ones before, because people would ask me all the time, what did Terri look like? And there was nothing I could think of, and there was nothing on the internet I could find other than people that I saw from Auschwitz that were being starved and dehydrated to death. Because that's what Terri was looking like. In fact, it was much worse. And I finally decided on the 10-year anniversary of her death, which was last year. I had a friend who was who's an artist and worked well with Photoshop. I described to him, from my memory, what Terri looked like. So he came up with, this is an artist rendition to the best of my ability of what my sister looked like, but this does not do any justice to how grotesque and how physically grotesque my sister looked right up until the point she died. But the attorney, as I said he had never seen such a look of beauty upon her face. And again, they have to tell you this, because if they would tell you the truth, hopefully there would be such a moral outrage that this would stop. To this day, I can't understand how we permit this to happening. You know, I heard earlier the argument, well, the other side was saying, well, we'll just starve and dehydrate these people to death because they'll see that it's so inhumane that we'll accept lethal injection. And someone asked me one time, said, "What, Bobby, why don't you think just giving your sister an injection and killing her right away would be more humane than taking away her food and hydration?" Yeah, I said, yeah, it would be more humane, but you won't be even more humane giving her food and water. That would be more humane, because killing is killing. I don't care how you do it. And killing is never the answer to any of our problems. It is never the answer. But I just please understand that when you hear this notion that this is an acceptable way, a peaceful way to die, please know how false it is. So what is happening in our culture today? And I know I'm running out of time here, but just people ask me, Bobby, has things gotten worse or better? I mean, did the publicity of Terri's case make things better? Has it given the awareness we need to correct what's happening? And unfortunately, maybe it's raised awareness now that people know that this happens, but things are getting worse. Let me just read this again from Wesley Smith. He posted this just in February. And he was talking about, he was referring to something Hillary Clinton said. By the way, I think I might be moving here. I mean, we have the choice between Hillary Clinton and Trump. So it can't be much worse than, excuse me. Anyway, I digress. But he was talking about Hillary Clinton, and Hillary Clinton kind of punted on the assisted suicide issue. So Wesley basically responded by saying, okay, if you don't understand the assisted suicide issue, let me explain to you what's going on. And he was referring to just in the Netherlands. And this is what he said. He said, the mentally ill are euthanized by psychiatrists. Incompetent Alzheimer patients are killed by doctors if they're asked to die in advance directives. Babies with serious disabilities or terminal illness are killed in their cribs. The elderly, tired of life, are killed by doctors. People with disabilities are killed by doctors. People with chronic illnesses are killed by doctors. People with terminal illnesses are killed by doctors. Euthanasia will soon be conjoined with organ harvesting, already happening in Belgium. People who have been asked to die are killed by doctors, what is euphemistically called termination without request or consent. Doctors terminally sedate people, put into artificial coma, and withdraw food and fluids at shocking rates so they don't have to be present when the patient dies. That's just here in Europe. In Canada, Wesley, another blog entry from Wesley just about a week ago, because Canada is going down the tubes too. This is in Canada. Death on demand for those with medically diagnosed serious sicknesses. Death on demand for those with disabilities. Death on demand for those with medically diagnosed mental illnesses. Death on demand for mature children with above conditions, perhaps with parental consent required. Nurses ordered to participate in euthanasia under the direction of a doctor, normalizing killing as an answer to suffering and making it easier for doctors to avoid the dirty work of homicide. Government-paid euthanasia. In the United States, last year, I believe there was 26 states introduced physician-assisted suicide. We have 5 states right now and California just passed, assisted suicide is legal. We have 5 that have been introduced in 2015, I think 6, because I think Nebraska has just been introduced recently. That's assisted suicide. Again, that's a little different from what I'm talking about here today. I'm talking about food and water. But I'm just trying to illustrate to you that they are not going to stop. And if we don't start paying attention to this, it's bad already. It's going to get much. I think that the pro-life community globally has done a wonderful exceptional job raising the awareness and fighting abortion, obviously. But we have to start looking at this issue as being equally important and fighting it with just as much zeal as we're fighting the abortion issue. Or else we are going to see something that's going to, I think the numbers, I don't know if they'll ever be comparable to what we see with abortion, but I think right now, if people knew how many people are being euthanized by what we're talking about here today, you would be absolutely shocked. Let me just finish up. I don't have time. This is just real quick. This is just one of the cases, some of the cases with our foundation. This was Brendan Flynn, who was in a catastrophic car accident. His friend was killed immediately. He was medevaced to a hospital. The doctor said, I think you can read him, they gave him 0% chance to live. If he did, he would be in a nursing home the rest of his life. They reckoned him to his mom, put him in a room and let him die. His mom said, no, you can do everything you can, which is getting increasingly harder, by the way, because doctors and hospitals are having more rights on making decisions, even if you want to keep someone alive or treat them. Nonetheless, his mom said, no, you can do everything you can to take care of my son. Today, Brandon is publicly speaking about his situation. He has 2 babies now. He met his wife while he was getting rehabilitation. And it's real. I mean, I often think about how many families are pressured by doctors and hospitals to do what they want to do to Brendan, and families not having the advocate or not understanding their rights, and not knowing that they can how much they're able to, what they can do to advocate for their loved ones, are giving in to the doctors, not ever giving their loved one a chance to see if in fact they can be helped. And that's what we're there for. We try to stand in between, to act as advocates for these families, to stop these things, to let families know the rights they have, and that doctors and hospitals don't always have the last say when it comes to certain treatments for somebody. I mean, what we're seeing in the United States is hospitals are now are acting in their own best interest rather than the patients. And again, it all comes down to money. They're looking out for the best interests of their bottom line. And whenever you do that, whenever you put up money against the value of human life, you're going to lose every time. Look at what's happening in the abortion industry. I want to close by just saying one last thing. I know this is really, I mean, we got to go eat dinner now. It's terrible. I mean, I know it's a very heavy subject, and I appreciate you all being here listening to this today, because it's so vital. I think it's the most important issue facing us today, the protection of life, all life. It's so important that you continue to fight against what you're fighting. I mean, we need you to fight against this insidious evil that's occurring. And there's been so many blessings that have come from my sister's case. I couldn't sit here tonight and give them all to you. I mentioned one, getting to know Allison and Colin, for that matter, and so many other people we met on the way that because of what we went through with my sister. And one thing for me, I was a fallen away Catholic, and it was because of my sister's case that brought me back to my faith. And I always say, I tell people, I say, all this focus to save my sister, and I look back on it, and she saved me. And that's what this is really, if we think about it, why are we here? We're here to get to heaven. I mean, that's our goal. And we got to do everything while we're here to try to accomplish that and be saints. So I guess, what I'm trying to say is use your Catholic faith to do that. And I never realized the power of the sacraments. And I'm sorry if you're not Catholic. I'm not trying to diminish other religions or what your faith, because, but we have such powerful tools to fight Satan, and continue this fight. I mean, our sacraments, the confession, the Eucharist, we have adoration, we have the Rosary, we have daily Mass. All these tools that we have to fight against what we're experiencing out there, so we don't get tired. So we know that we're doing what our Lord wants us to do. So whatever you do, surround yourself with like-minded people and use your faith, whether you're Catholic or not. But if you are Catholic, use the sacraments to get you through your day-to-day struggles when you're facing these types of things. There's nothing more powerful, and it will get you to heaven if you stay close to our Lord. I just want to finish, which is kind of funny. I had so many people. I've been single 49 years. And it's funny, whenever I'll do pro-life talks, all the women were always trying to fix me up with people, and they would, I'm going to pray that you get a wife, you pray. And I basically gave up. I didn't think I was ever going to get married, particularly because of this issue. I mean, you meet people, and they're like, what do you do? And it's like, well, I talk about starvation and dehydration. Like, oh, well, see you later. So, So I don't even tell my wife what I do. She thinks I'm a special agent right now. But I was at a pro-life event. And again, this comes from the blessings from what I experienced. So all these prayers finally paid off. So I met my wife at a pro-life event. So here, let me just, that's a case here. No, that's not my wife. That was bad timing. But so I met my wife, and I probably should check my sanity. So I've never been close to being married. 49 years. I gave up being married and having kids. So I met my wife, and I married her. So guess how many kids we have? There's all of them. The one in the middle is not my. That's Sarah. Oh. That's Sarah Palin, and she's not one of our kids in the middle. We're at an event, but so I married Christina. Sorry, I never managed to get through this without getting emotional, but she's been a blessing, and I never would have met her if it wasn't for my sister. So, by the way, her husband passed away a few years ago. He had an aggressive form of cancer, and then we met at a pro-life event and married a few years after we met. But now I have 9 beautiful kids and 4 grandchildren. I don't even know. So it's. But the point I'm making is what God or what man has intended for evil, God can make good, and He's certainly doing it for us. So, thank you, and God bless you all. Thank you.